Welcome to Subject to Change, a sustainability podcast. We're here with Hobie Stocking. I got your book.
Okay, thank you.
Which is awesome. And just for the record, there's a note in the book. And it says, Jody, thanks, here's the deal. 1, if the book winds up in a little library, I'll refund your purchase minus shipping.
Okay.
2, yes to interviewing for your podcast. My areas of focus are A, climate communication, B, I run a clean energy program for my city, Hobie.
I guess that works.
Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. When you see the little microphone in the lower right, click on that to learn more. We're so glad you're here.
I've been poking around on your website, and I'm very interested by the work that you do. I liked the phrase on your About Us page that said there's so many people that are trying to combat the hopelessness with like hopefulness, basically, but that's not enough. So what's your how are you getting out to people? How are you reaching out to people? How are you shifting that tide?
Let's flow to hope.
That's a very big question.
No, let's start big.
My answer.
Yeah, just start. You can answer anything, and it works.
My answer is I've always been an environmentalist, but I always thought I could buy absolutions from the Sierra. You know, it's like everyone else. And I had an epiphany. If you were on my website, you might have seen the little video that I did with Teo and Ian. And it started me thinking about climate change and the climate crisis that we're facing.
Hobie needed a focus shift.
I knew that what I was going to do would either focus on helping kids or on climate communications. And I've got a background, my formal training is in chemical engineering and physics. But I spent most of my time working in the area of branding, advertising, and marketing. So the engineering part of me said, well, where is the problem? Where does the problem exist? And of course, climate change is huge, it's amorphous, it's everywhere. There are dozens and dozens of different solutions to it.
Let's learn about accelerators.
There are direct things that we can do, but there are also things that we can do which I call accelerators. And an accelerator would be policy, politics, communication, behavioral psychology. All of those things can be, or strategy can be used in any of the solution areas with respect to climate. And I decided to look at the climate communications segment of the accelerator area.
That's something that's fascinated me for years because the focus tends to be on data because it's easy to say, oh, if we're reducing energy, this is how much carbon's reduced. Let's figure out the data. Let's have everyone report. Let's see how they're progressing. But nobody ever talks about the stories or finds the compelling words. The experience of a mind shifting. I already had a little mind shift from reading your book because you said, savor the earth. And that was like, wow, that's a much more real and connective phrase than save the earth, as if we had a right to be the savior of this complex system that is nurturing us. That's like when in business, and I'm an architect and in still a very male dominated industry, it's like when somebody thinks that they know what you need to succeed, but they've never asked you. We're not asking Mother Earth. We're not savoring her responses, which I was so enamored with.
And that kind of moves this, the approach that to answer Lauren's question is, in a broad sense, I'm interested in storytelling and how we can use more of it, because I believe that the climate movement is failing. We have successes, yes, we get things like the IRA passed, but there's so much evidence out there that we're not doing enough.
Entrenchment.
In part, it's because for a long time, we've been trying to fight climate denial. And that doesn't work. Trying to prove something to somebody that isn't willing to open their mind to what actually might be helping. And it actually has the opposite effect, is that it entrenches. If somebody says climate change is real and then I try and prove it to them, we can never prove anything to anyone. And the climate movement has used a focus on facts and reason, and often facts and reason are necessary, but they again don't convince anyone of anything in the process. And so if we start to think about those narratives and where we tell our stories, we're going to be a lot better off. And quite frankly, we're up against some pretty stiff competition from fossil fuel think tanks and different conservative media, because we're one of the only countries on the face of the earth that has a party that's completely in denial about our environment and our climate.
The value of humility. Challenge that I face is that I just can't, I truly can't comprehend how they cannot be aware of the changes that have occurred in even the last 20 years, let alone 30, 40, 50. And so I have to caution myself, because I'm so certain of my climate facts that I have to come still to the conversations and prepare myself before I go into a conversation to have humility and curiosity, because if I go in there with my climate facts, I'm just not going to have a conversation at all. Why can't we just be talking about all of the things that we see? You had some fantastic stories about recognizing how dramatically things have changed. Changes over time. You reflect on how that place is today, whether you've seen it or not. You know the stats of the beluga whales being endangered, and I grew up, seeing a beluga whale in an aquarium and thinking that was the height of education and connection, and then not realizing until I was in my 40s how abysmal the life of that beluga whale in that aquarium probably was. It just never occurred to me when I was 10.
Yeah.
Why didn't it?
So I have a question that I think borders on that. I think that I have started to become aware of location-based changes over the last 10 to 15 years, and I am in my early 40s. So is this like an age recognition thing? Is this just having enough self-performed historical data? Or is it just becoming that apparent to recognize that, like, whoa, this is drastically different than 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago? Which do you think?
For me, it wasn't necessarily an age-related thing, because I've been connected to nature for most of my life. Although you do see a cumulative effect. It is age-related, and I'm going to go too deep into this subject, but
we love too deep.
It's age-related in the sense of maturity of, and I'll just say it, of men in general in this country, and how we've been raised in the ethos of competition, domination, and a number of other things. And the idea that we are above nature, can dominate it. Yes, after a while, maybe with maturity, you understand that we're part of nature and part of the biosphere, we're really great at rationalizing things. I mean, we have a cognitive dissonance that says, yeah, unless it's happening to me right this minute, then we intellectually we understand, we can project and look at things in the future, but we experience them right now. And climate is the worst kind of problem because it's big, it is remote. It's remote both in proximity, it seems like, as if I go outside right now, I'm okay, but there are heat waves happening someplace and they're increasing. It's remote in the sense of it being a time-bound thing that is almost seems like it's 10 years off. It is a problem that unless you have some agency, how can you help the ice caps from melting? You help the ice caps from melting.
We need to break it faster.
I like to tell people we need to break the climate down faster. And people say, well, what's that about? Because climate is so big and amorphous, it seems overwhelming. And yet we make progress and we will solve this because it is a human-made phenomenon. When we have tens of millions of people working on tens of thousands of projects. And so you can't have, if a problem is unsolvable, people just give up and they don't work on it. But I can actually work on trying to get energy efficiency and electrification into 3,000 homes in my town that I live in. And that works. And in part, I think we also need to change our identity that makes action a virtue, because action's the antidote to despair. And just like the Marlboro Man, we drive our habits like cigarette smoking through identity. We can change the identity that we have as humans and reward people for the work that they do, thank them, feel like we're in this together. And I'd love to see us promote our climate heroes more than we actually do.
A WTF moment. One of the stories in your book was the Earthwalker pledge, where your grandson actually said, well, after you created this beautiful pledge and he absorbed it. I mean, I love kids are just amazing, right? He absorbed it. And then when he asked you the question, what are we going to do about that? So the pledge had in it to conserve, preserve, and protect our air, water, and land, and all the creatures that live there, because we are all connected. And it was a way to connect. I mean, I'm assuming here it was a way to connect with your grandson, but also to give him what he thought he needed, which was a little different than joining Cub Scouts. I mean, there's a bonding moment in there. Everything's good. And then he says, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to do what you just told me we're going to do? God, I love kids.
It was one of those cartoon balloons that I wish I'd been able to take back, because it was a WTF moment. And it was, oh my God. And that was my epiphany there. And, I've given that pledge, strangely enough, to other people that I've met on the trail, and once to a bus full of Chinese tourists, having somebody translate it. And
that's awesome.
I had no idea, but it might have been for the novelty of, speaking to a Westerner or whatever, but they all clapped afterward. But you never know how you might affect someone else. And it just becomes kind of a common bond. And I think building that identity and supporting each other is all we can do. I wish there was a magic set of words. I wish there was a single magic action, but there isn't. There's just a lot of things that we have to do. So
Yeah,
the
that's
answer
wonderful.
is find what works for you. Encourage people, and reward them when they do it.
Connective phrasing. I want to celebrate you for writing this book and sharing these stories, because even you used a similar term, even a cynical optimist like me found a whole bunch of phrases that help me see my relationships in a slightly different way, which is so empowering. I think that's wonderful. Did you, Lauren, do you have that experience or another experience?
Teaching.
Mm.
There's always, there is one particular student that I can think of in mind right now who, because of her genuine, she's just brutally honest in the best way. And her perspective is just so refreshing. And what I will say, so about the kind of going back to your failure question, I think that yes, I get profound shifts from stories, absolutely. But I also see profound shifts from my failures. Because how do you not internalize that and take that back and kind of walk through the steps of what happened, right? And so it was actually something that had happened last semester, and she called me out on it. It was requested, it was part of the assignment, but she was very honest, and it made me rethink everything about my role as a teacher, my role as a white teacher, my role as just a person who thinks that they're actually being very careful when asking certain questions or putting certain content out there, only to come and realize, like, it's hard to know other people's perspective when, of course, the only perspective you can come from is your own. But for me, I think that dealing with students, I think that my students at this point really do. I mean, it's so cliche to say, oh, I learn more from my students than they do from me. But in a sense, I sort of feel that way, because they hold a mirror up to you, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a mirror that's provided. So I think for me at this point, really kind of taking on that new challenge of teaching and learning the best way to navigate certain difficult conversations. And I like this idea of storytelling, because I think that in this way, as you're saying, Hobie, there's a really nice way of drawing people into a topic and getting them to understand a perspective in a non-confrontational way. And I know that I have I teach at a community college, so I have a really diverse background of students. And I mean, I have a lot of rural students, I have a lot of city students, like, and everything in between. And I know that my messaging about sustainability probably actually comes across more as fear mongering. And so I think that the storytelling route is probably going to be more successful to gain more people to appreciate it.
Nature just is. And Hobie, I don't know if this is something that makes sense. In my interactions with nature, you can prepare, you can be very, you can have everything in your pack that you need when you're on a very long hike. But invariably, and you touched on this quite a bit, nature isn't angry at you, it's not supporting you, it just is. You're with it in the moment. And I think that one of the things that I wonder is if a person is outdoors and in that world that is not dictating or dominating or mean or friendly, but just is, if there's more of an experience of things not going right being possible, and that's okay, you have to take the next step anyway, I wonder if that feeling is created differently than if you're always in a manufactured everything's measured to within an inch. You know exactly that the food is processed. I wonder if there's a difference in a wildlife or a rewilded life versus a very contained, structured life. And it's about two-way access.
I mean, it would be nice if we could all afford or had access to nature, but we
Mm.
don't. And so it's very much a privileged thing. I'd
That's a
also
great
say that to Lauren's point, when you talk about your students, that it brings me back to the question of listening.
Mm.
And storytelling has sort of a one directional, but other people will resonate if they identify with your values. But one of the best things you can do is just ask students or other people. And that occurs if you go out into, we're split as a country into rural
Oh.
and city dwelling, and we make judgments about each other. But if you go into the rural communities or farm communities, there's no one more attuned to nature than those that are living in, are stewards for the land they're in. So yeah, I think it makes a difference, and I wish we all could access, become young earthwalkers or whatever, and have that privilege. To me, it's less about telling somebody you need to do this or you need to eat that or whatever. It is creating an atmosphere where we can respect each other for what we can do for a solution, whether it's working in nature, whether it's working on housing or poverty or any other issue that we face.
One of the things as an architect that I've been engaging in a lot in the last few years is biophilic design, and making sure that there's nature in the space and connection to nature through the architecture, to normalize the fact that a table, I'm sitting at a table that comes from pieces of wood that have been glue laminated together and planed, and to normalize our relationship to the materials of nature for a whole bunch of different reasons. We're happier when we're surrounded by wood and natural materials, and I think that those subtle reminders, even if we're very separate from nature, those reminders within the spaces that we've built can do a lot too. I mean, Lauren's sitting with a plant next to her, and she's got daylight coming in over her shoulder, and even the screen next to her has a wood frame and has an artistic representation in it that has like a biophilic feel, and I think that's really cool.
I built that screen. Just
you built that screen.
I did. It was a gift for my mom.
That's so cool.
Very cool.
So,
I'd agree absolutely with that. And
yeah,
I want to diverge into a little story to reinforce what
yeah,
you're saying, which is
Fractal Beauty.
I do have, since you mentioned it, I do have a chapter in the book called Fractal Beauty. And the thing that you mentioned about being surrounded by wood is that wood does have a fractal pattern to it, and that offsets, I think, the straight lines and rigid architecture of a lot of our surrounding, whether it's internal or external.
Yeah.
And so my son-in-law runs a furniture store, and he sells modern and transitional furniture. And I'm always telling him, take a wooden bowl and put a wooden bowl on that glass table, because we are wired evolutionarily, I believe, to appreciate fractal content because we see so much of it in nature and we grow as a result of that. So that's partly why I chose the wooden desk and partly why.
That sounds like an interesting sales research approach. Like the study about Walmart that saw an increase of sales of any of the kiosks that were placed under a skylight. I wonder if he could run I wonder if he could run a similar thing, but this time by placing wooden bowls,
Yeah.
manufactured objects, and see if those sold in better quantities.
Dealing with grief. I just want to say that I haven't yet brought myself to reading the last section of your book. It's got stories about loneliness and solitude, about the last raspberry, about some of the things that are possibly in our future, and if we don't act, are more possible in our future. And I have yet to read them.
Well, I think to
I'll do it though.
answer Lauren's question again about, do you change? Is it becoming aware? Is it a maturity and or is it just age that allows you to see things? Well, of course, you change your perspective with age. And yeah, there is a certain amount of grief that we experience. We think about climate and what's happening to our environment. And I think of grief as a form of love, and it's the loss that we feel in the process, but it's also an appreciation for and love for what's out there from a natural world standpoint. I still love. I mean, every year in the spring, if I can, and this year I'm going to take 2 of my grandchildren with me, as we're going out to the Southwest, because one of the things that I love is I love wandering out in the desert, and mostly I'm by myself when I'm off trails, discovering things and that sort of thing. But it gives you time to think about things and gives you time to appreciate the world. And I want to share that with my grandchildren. So this year they're coming along.
That's great. I know that my son and I have had great conversations while we're hiking in the Adirondacks, because it's the great silencer to be out in the middle of the woods, because you're compelled to listen, and then you're also more comfortable saying things because there's no one around. And the reason we started hiking was because I figured that would be one way to maintain good connection with him as he grew up. So we have had some great experiences. We've had some of those experiences that you touch on in your book where things didn't go the way they were supposed to, and it was a little terrifying now and again, which didn't make us love the woods any less. It just made us a little more attentive the next time around. Sounds in nature.
There's a difference between hiking alone and hiking with people.
Yes.
And I'd like to do both. And there's certainly, you were talking about design and cities versus rural areas and that sort of thing. There's also a soundscape that changes that. Where I am now, in their wisdom, the state legislature is going to prevent us from banning gas-powered leaf blowers. But if I start and have my windows open, it'll start Monday morning at 8 a.m. and it'll run almost all week. And so learning the silence of, or the sounds of nature, is also a set of fractal patterns that we listen to. And I think that is part of the joy of being outside as well.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. That's beautiful.
And I think that when you're hiking with a group, and this is what I expect, because I have 3 grandkids that are coming with me here, is that I always think of children playing as the sound of water over rocks.
Absolutely.
And so I expect sometime it will be that sound that we're hearing, and other times I expect things, as I told Teo once, that we're going to learn to be quiet for an hour. And he was kind of upset about that, except we were driving someplace and he said, "Now I'm going to be quiet for an hour." And he put his head down.
That's funny. One of the things, just a reflection on sound, I worked a couple of summers at Electric Boat which is, building submarines in Groton, Connecticut. And I bring this up because a couple of the older guys in the shipyard offices whistled all the time, and hummed. And I said something to my dad because he was about the same age. And he said, you know what? He said when he was in his 20s, everyone whistled, everyone hummed. There was always that kind of external music going on, and people shared songs with each other. And I was thinking how much I actually miss that in the current workaday world, because we're all wearing these things. We've all got our
these
own
things,
music.
yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I was in the office the other day, and I was walking from the kitchen back to my cube, and I was whistling something that I learned in jazz band in high school, that stuck in my head, and I was whistling it. And people, I could see people go, like, who's doing that? I'm like, I'm gonna whistle all the time now.
Did you know that science has actually confirmed that humming and whistling is like this, like people who hum and whistle actually have greater amounts of happiness.
Well, why wouldn't they?
It's like there's data that backs that up now.
Well,
and
I wanted
that was
the
interesting.
story
It
what
makes
got
sense.
me involved, but if you need the data, then go for it. Let's hear about Hobie's hero. Who's your hero? Is there somebody that we can share with the people who watch this YouTube channel to introduce them to another concept or something that has inspired you? They can be in existence still, or writers or performers from old, or somebody that said something in a way that struck you.
I would answer that maybe this way, to think about books I've read more than once.
Okay.
And there's a book by Barry Lopez, who's a naturalist, called Field Notes.
Oh, yeah, I
And
know this.
the first story is about crossing the desert. And he's so lyrical. He wrote Arctic Dreams as well, which is very, much about nature. But there's something about the first story he wrote. And I used to, when my daughter was going to college, she'd get nervous before a test, and she would call me, and I would read that story to her. And so, yeah, I think he has some perspective, and I'd recommend Barry Lopez as an example. Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's great. I'm a total bookaholic, so it's on my list.
I know Jody's so much better. She's like, oh, I'm going to read this book before this person comes on. I'm like, I'm still reading the same book from 3 months ago. I'll catch up. I'll catch up next year.
And what should we all be focusing on?
If you could put the entire world on a collective pause of whatever they got going on and focus only on one issue, what would your initiative or issue be?
Oh, wow. I wish you'd sent that one earlier.
Sorry. But you know what? Worst case, you can always send it to us.
Yeah. Well, we did put the world on pause.
Oh,
And as someone who's older than dirt, people didn't believe me that said, when I said, the skies were clearer when I was a kid, they were bluer.
mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden people are going, look at how blue the sky is.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to put the world on pause. What would I do? I don't know. I'd probably give you some philosophical bullshit about understanding or that sort of thing. If from a climate standpoint, I'd say we need to bring our methane emissions under control. We seem to think that we can replace our use of fossil fuel by naming something natural or naming it clean. And
That's
indeed,
crazy.
I think we are relying way too much on that. And it's not the total issue with respect to greenhouse gases, but it's one of the things the world signed a methane treaty, and whether we actually implement it, because it doesn't seem like it, because we keep adding more gas peaker plants. And in my community, the gas industry has managed to prevent us from locally banning the use of new gas hookups. And
Really?
so with even though that there's a health component, a big health asthma component to having gas stoves in your house, and there's a huge leakage issue when methane's 80 times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So that's my magic switch. I'll take a little piece of the total pie and say, we don't need it.
So you're doing good work for your community toward that end, which I at some point would love to learn more about that. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
Come back and, ping me in a year and see whether we've made that progress, because it's really, really hard work.
It's really, really hard work.
We will do that. We will ping you in a year.
This is great, Hobie. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. It was good to be here and good to have this conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
I love
you
these
guys are great.
conversations.
You're great.
Do you mind if I read like a little bit from the last page of your book, or would you like to read the last page of your book?
I have to see what it is. Hang on a second.
It's page 126 on
my.
Some parting words from Hobie from his book.
What you do is incredibly important and significant. Thank you for all the work that you do. A better world is possible, one that is equitable, one that is powered by clean, renewable energy, one where our first responsibility is not to serving ourselves, but in how we serve others. One where our children are assured a safe future. The pursuit of this world bonds us together in appreciating the world, nature, and the wonder of which we are part. It provides us with collective safety, one where we are all Earthwalkers. We are all connected. Savor the earth.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I got chills in hearing you read it, because it does exactly what I think we need to remind ourselves, each of us as individuals, of our place in the world. It's a contributing piece of the complexity.
Well, thank you both for what you're doing. And you help spread the action.
Thank you, as always, for joining us for Subject to Change.
That's
yeah,
right.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Hobie. And thank you for your time today. This has been beautiful.
Okay.
Your engineering look is great. I'm just saying, I feel like this is your philosophical look that you've got today.
Okay. Well, I can send you a philosophical look as well.